Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Under the Macroscope. And thank you to all of you who've supported the podcast so generously and spread the word. Our stats tell us that we're heading into the top 10% of podcasts in the world. So very happy with that and hope to continue climbing the charts. As always, I'm joined by Jabir Sadawala, Chief Strategist for the Skybound Capital Group, based in the company's London office. And we take a look at some of the factors affecting economies around the world. And first up, Jabir, this week, a lot of fresh economic data out this week, which caught your attention.
Yeah, hi, Matt. That's right. I mean, so round about the third week of every month, we get the release of what they call the flash PMI estimates. So they're literally just a heads up on the big numbers to come, and it concentrates on the larger countries around the globe, and it's dependent on at least 80% of countries who have reported. And frankly, the numbers are looking quite good. I mean, for instance, if you start with the UK, excuse me, as an example, so we've got manufacturing in the UK rising to 57.9. The month before it was 55.1. Now, bear in mind, we're not even a manufacturing-oriented nation. Manufacturing makes up something like 10%, give or take, of our total GDP. We're very services driven. And for all the slating that the UK gets from different economists, that they've got the worst to come yet. These numbers have continuously gone up and up and up. Any figure in excess of 50 implies expansion. So at 57.9, that's a very impressive number, and I think it's confounded a few economists. It also gets impressive when you look at services, which is what our economy is really dependent on. That came in at 56.8. That's a big jump on last month when it was 49.5. So what it's saying is, despite the renewed lockdown, somehow or other, we're still finding ways to get on with, drumming up the economy, including on a manufacturing front. Now, if you look also around the globe, I mean, for instance, the EU, we've had flash numbers that have come in there as well. And manufacturing there soared. It literally went through the roof. It's now hit 62.4. Now, the month before, it was 57.9. So even the month before was impressive. And that's very much on the back of exports. Now, you've heard me say before that the thing with the EU is that they do rely on exports, for their GDP. So they're not just a consumer-dependent nation. Exports plays a big part. So I think that explains why the numbers are so good. Their factories are humming. And within that, if you look at German manufacturing, this is where it's so distorted. Because in Germany's case, manufacturing stands at 66.6. So you can see what the big driver is there. But they're not alone. I mean, also in France, it reached 58.8. When you look at their services, it's a bit of a different picture. Because in services, it's standing at 48.8, which is still in contraction territory, even though it's up on last month. And then when you break that down into Germany and France, it's a very similar story. So you've got Europe that is on the consumer front very subdued, but on the manufacturing front is enjoying some sort of a boom. And last but not least, the US can't go without commenting on the US, and their manufacturing PMI increased to 59. Now they too are not that heavily dependent on manufacturing as for their GDP, but 59 is a good number, and that's just up a nudge on last month. Their services data showed it reaching 60. So can you imagine when these stimulus checks start to hit the appropriate people? Just think what that's going to do in terms of spending power, together with a fascinating vaccination program.
You said last week on the podcast there was some pretty staggering growth forecasts that had been revised upward across some of the globe's larger economies for this year. But these numbers tend to suggest that they're on track.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's exactly right. And I think it's also showing that companies have done a remarkably good job adapting to the COVID environment. You know, that's one thing no one can ever underestimate: human nature when push comes to shove. And they have found a way of adapting. So they've kept it alive. And, you know, it's if we do find ourselves in a renewed lockdown for whatever reason, I take comfort from the fact that you know, it's not going to be a complete disaster that we saw with the very first lockdown last year.
Still to come on this week's edition of Under the Macroscope, we're going to be getting some thoughts from Jabir on the comments from Andy Haldane, chief economist of the Bank of England, and some of the items that he is putting out into the market, an ECB blockchain trial, a quick vaccine update as well. But first, a quick comment, Jabir, on elections in Israel and their ramifications.
Yeah, so this was a real surprise, and I'm sure it is to Netanyahu as well, who has come through with yet another indecisive result. So these are projections, but the right-wing bloc that he heads up, they think will end up, you know, he'll end up with 52 seats, which is 9 short of the majority that he needs. Now contrast that with the opposition. They are on course to win about 57 seats. Now remember their vaccine program, which has been the darling of the world.
Yeah.
They started earlier, and they've gone through it with remarkable efficiency. I mean, you know, they've vaccinated something like 60% of their population just with the first dose. I'm not even counting the second dose. And I'm sure, you know, part of the strategy was that with that, we're going to secure an outright majority here. Well, this hasn't gone to plan at all. If that was the plan, well, that bit of it has not worked one bit. But what's interesting also in a rather surprise development is that an Arab party is projected to get 4 seats, and surprise, surprise, they could end up with the balance of power. So as far as I'm aware, I think that would be a first. And you know, yet again, Israeli politics gets into the murky world of how are they gonna battle through this one? I'm surprised, I have to admit.
Well, it's certainly one to keep an eye on. I mentioned Andy Haldane earlier, Jabir. I know you personally have been impressed with some of the commentary coming out from the chief economist of the Bank of England.
Yeah, I am, and the reason, and obviously this is a natural bias that I have when I'm looking at anything that analysts, and particularly economists, have to say, because for the most part, unfortunately, and meaning no disrespect to economists, but they tend to be by the book. They tend to dwell on their models, and I think they mostly all acknowledge that the models can be deficient. But what I've noticed with Andy Haldane in the various comments that he's come out with, you know, since he's taken up this role, is that he tends to apply a bit of a consumer behavioral sentiment to his thinking, which just gives it a bit more of a reality. And his latest comment was in an interview that he gave with Robert Peston, who's a leading journalist here on the ITV channel. And it was specifically regarding UK consumers and the amount of money, 150 billion pounds, that has basically found its way into savings, you know, all because of COVID last year. And Andy's suggestion was that, can you imagine, even if only a percentage of that, a small percentage of that, finds its way into the economy through spending power? And I quote, you know, he says, when it comes, i.e. he's referring to spending and the impact on growth, when it comes, it will come fast and it will be large. And I think that's a very, you know, very telling comment. And you have to sort of think about the potential implications of inflation.
Yeah. Another thing that you said had caught your eye was a blockchain trial from the European Central Bank with the prospect of trialing a digital euro. What's that all about?
Yeah, so the concept of it is not new. I think it really has its roots um, in how seriously people are now taking crypto. So if there's one great thing to come out of crypto, it is exactly that. You know, how do we now move towards that whole digital society? And to my mind, crypto can definitely take the credit for that. So what's happened here is that authorities have developed a technology allowing investors to buy and sell securities on the blockchain in return for central bank money. So this is in Germany. The Bundesbank, their central bank, in partnership with Deutsche Börse, their big stock exchange, and Germany's leading debt agency, have claimed that their solution was the first to allow securities that are sold to have the proceeds received on account at the central bank. Now, that's a very interesting comment there, because if you think back to our debate around crypto and particularly Bitcoin, whenever that was, a few weeks ago, one of the things, if you recall, I said is that it's all about regulation. Okay, now notice how in that little trio there, you've got the Bundesbank, i.e. the central bank, you've got the Deutsche Börse, the regulator, basically the financial services, and then you've got the debt agency and the central bank collecting the monies. Okay, so it's all nicely regulated. But full marks of them, what they've done is they've actually conducted a test in which a 10-year bond was issued on blockchain, and it was traded by 6 banks. So, you know, big names like Barclays and Citi and Commerce and Dresdner and Goldman Sachs and SocGen. And the ECB is exploring the creation of a digital euro, possibly on blockchain, to complement cash in the next 5 years. This is the beginning of the end of cash. And if you think about the implications here, okay, I once did a back of the envelope calculation many years ago when this is actually going back to 2011 when the whole Greece saga was going on. And opponents of Greece were saying that, you know, why don't you fix your economy and, you know, for a start, pay your taxes, given the extent of the black economy. So I just did a rough calculation on the UK economy based on some research that had come out at the time. And on the assumption that, let's say, 10% of the UK economy is, you know, works in the black market. Mm. And given the size of the UK economy, we're talking tens and tens of billions that just goes uncollected in tax because it's the cash economy. You know, and how many times have you walked into a shop and said, sorry, we don't accept checks, right? And all this kind of stuff. It happens every day. We know it. And I think this is one step in revolutionizing tax collection.
Yeah. And it's, I'll tell you another thing, just from personal experience, just another consequence of the COVID effect. I mean, personally, I hardly carry cash ever. And it's just sort of happened naturally. That the sort of tap and go has become the norm. Just as we've said on a previous podcast, we were really scared of internet banking when at first, but it's become second nature. So interesting to see how that plays out. Just finally, as we have done in recent weeks, and it's always relevant, just a quick update on vaccination programs. So certainly where you reside, things continue apace, notwithstanding some of the barriers being placed in its path.
Yeah, and honestly, it seems to be going very well indeed. I mean, when you look at the latest numbers, just ranking them in terms of people who have been given the first dose, let alone the second dose, which constitutes a full vaccination. We've got some great numbers here. I mean, so, you know, in Israel, we just spoke about that, 57.5% have now received the first dose. Fully vaccinated as well, you know, then takes it up well over that. The UK, you know, is now 43.4%. This is based on the Bloomberg vaccine tracker. 43.4% first dose. Remarkable progress there. If you throw into the mix a second dose, then, you know, you're looking at around 57, 58%. Sorry, beg your pardon, 47, 48% of the population. And the US, obviously, because given the importance of the economy, over a quarter of the population having received the first dose. And Biden has made it clear that he wants after 100 days in office, he wants 200 million Americans to have received that vaccine dose. So it really does seem to be going well. I think it's going to be that light bulb moment when we just cross that all important point, and suddenly we're now ready to start thinking about how we go back to traveling, how we go back to international air travel. All this talk about COVID passports. And like it or not, I think, if you want to go into various stores and shops, you're going to have to need a COVID passport. That's just the reality of it.
Well, we keep an eye on that as always. My last item, Jabir, because I know you love your rugby, and it has been one of the big pieces of news in South Africa this week, and indeed in the UK. The British and Irish Lions tour to South Africa in the originally specified window, so July, August. Still a lot of work to be done, still a lot of detail around whether there'll be crowds in stadiums and all those kind of things. But at least there's a line in the sand, and we can look forward to the world champions against the British and Irish Lions. I repeat, Jabir, the world champions.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. I have no comment on that one.
Who last played on the 2nd of November 2019 in Yokohama. I'll leave you there. And look forward to our next chat. We'll be doing a bit of a Q1 review in our next Under the Macroscope podcast. Don't forget that if you would like to subscribe, it's available on Apple, Spotify, and the Google Podcast platform for Android. For those of you who are taking some time off over the Easter period, we hope that you are safe and come back refreshed. And until next time on Under the Macroscope, goodbye, everyone.